All right. Hello, everyone. We are live streaming right now from the Dia Bondi Communications offices in Berkeley on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Speak Powerfully with Dia Bondi. I'm so happy to have you here with me, whether you're watching it live or on the replay, because today we're talking about and hearing from a leader in the culture and D&I space around what it means to grow your voice, and his story around growing his voice so he can speak powerfully on behalf of his own mission and goals and the impact that he wants to have in the world. But first, I want to start by talking with everyone a little bit about what my definition at Dia Bondi Communications is. When I think about how to talk about what mastery in communications really is, because it is not about polished perfection. It's not about performance. It's not about technique. And it's not about what you wear. It is about the presence of three very important things. And when these three things are present, we know as your audience, whether you're in a boardroom or a ballroom, on a big stage or little, whether you're fundraising, whether you're running a new initiative, or you're helping your organization or your industry know who you are for the very first time. If these three things are present, we know you are masterful. We recognize you as someone who is masterful. And for me, as a coach and teacher of how to speak powerfully at the most critical communications moments in your career and business, when I am coaching you in a context of workshop or as a private client in my one-on-one engagements, I can sense you're on the path to mastery when these three things are present. I'm going to share with you what they are. One is, do we have a sense, and can you speak from the heart? Now, it seems obvious that you need to speak in a way that is aligned with who you truly are, but that is easier said than done, because saying what you really want to say in a way that can be said to move things forward can be tricky. Sometimes it is the more courageous choice, which isn't just about your opinion or content, but saying it in a way that is uniquely yours, finding the words that describe the idea, the direction we're going in a way that actually makes sense to you, and you let the world see the world. You let the world see the world through your eyes is a courageous choice. If you can do that, that's the first indicator that you're on the path to mastery, or that you are masterful. The second one is that you are in control, which is not to say you're in control of people or a moment, but you are in control in a particular moment. You're not trying to tame the ocean, something uncontrollable, but you are in fact in control enough that as the ocean tosses you around, you remain upright, that you can respond to the moment in real time in a way that is, you are in control. You are present and aware of what's happening and responding in a way that still is aligned to who you actually are. The moment is not controlling you. If you have those two components present, those are the two components that of the three components that tell me you are either on the path to mastery or you are masterful. And the third one is impact. Do you actually have an impact on us? Do we have an impact feeling from you as we listen to you? Again, boardroom, ballroom, industry conference, and beyond. So as we talk to my guest today about how he has his journey in growing his own leadership voice and using communications, critical communications moments, standing up at an all hands, having a really critical presentation moment to his executive team, how he has come to find his own voice and mastery and use it as a tool for his own leadership and a tool for the impact that he's had in the organizations he's worked with, keeping in mind that that's what mastery is. It's not about a perfect script and where to put your hands. So I'd like to now bring up Dino Anderson, who is a longtime friend and colleague and someone I deeply respect in the world of culture. He is a cultural capital architect and inclusion and diversity lead right now in the tech space. And he is someone who has to have a huge impact through influence in the conversations and the stories that he tells in his organization and across functions, because his work spans every aspect of how an organization operates and the culture that it creates and cultivates, as a workplace, distributed or otherwise. So Dino Anderson, I'm going to bring you on up. Hi, Dino. Hi.
Dia, I was going to scoot my chair in and just come into view.
But, no, you didn't have to do that. There's no scooting necessary. I can just push a button. I'm so happy to have you here. Hi.
How you doing?
Good. So why don't you tell folks really quickly what your role is in the world and what your job is, because those are not always the same thing.
Absolutely. So thank you, Dia, for having me on today. I definitely love the intro that you put there at the beginning with those 3 points around speaking from the heart, being in control and impact. And I think that speaks exactly to when we talk about role versus job, right? So, my role, quite frankly, is to make what seems impossible possible and real, and to catalyze and galvanize everyone to move towards that direction, in that direction and towards that goal. That's
having witnessed you work for the last how many years we've been friends and colleagues, galvanizing is a great way to describe how I see you work. And I've also watched the arc of your last, 7 or 8 years of how really skillful you've gotten at doing that and recognizing, galvanizing, putting together, orchestrating what needs to be in place in order to galvanize something. So you're not using heft, but you're using placement and strike points to make that galvanizing happen, to have the impact that you want to have. I mean, I don't know if how I'm describing it feels accurate to you, but that's what I witness.
Yeah, no, that's right on. And so, what I do in my job in the space of, diversity, inclusion, equity work, and talent development also is, as a center of excellence, you're always looking at the system that is, right, and the organizational system that is in place. And as a good systems thinker, you have to look at strike points. You have to look at where are the levers that you can pull so that you get both impact that cascades upwards and also cascades into the organization. So that's always something that I have to do in my job and in my role and my function. But I think going back to that piece around galvanizing individuals around that is that it has to meet people where they are. That's another important thing, is I've had to learn that really early on, not only in my professional career that's now within the tech space, but also before when I was an academic, right? I had to meet students where they were. I had to go to conferences and meet the audience where they were, perhaps not knowing anything about this idea, and then making sure that there was something in it that they can latch onto and say, oh, wow, that's something I can lean into, and then carrying them on a journey and in a story, right? So that they can say, I play a crucial role in that, and I have a piece that can make sure that this thing goes forward.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I notice also in your work is that you communicate in a way that invites people to bring their perspective forward a lot. Mm-hmm. And using, you bring forward someone else's voice as a way to voice what the project that you're working on. Absolutely. I see you do that. So you came out of academia and now you're in the space of technology. And, I know that your work is sort of agnostic to industry, but how did you as an executive in your space, how did you develop confident, high impact communications mastery? And what role does that play in the success of your career?
No, absolutely. I think this goes back to your 3 points at the beginning when you said, and then I have 3 points too. The first one is, when you said speak from the heart is, you have to believe and you have to have conviction, right, in what you are trying to deliver into the world. You have to have conviction in that.
Is that hard?
It's very, very hard. I think in the academic space, it was much more, I guess I gained mastery there and it was easy. And you had a bunch of peers that spoke your language. So that made it easy because people had the same lexicon and they can go there with you. coming out of academia, and any of you who've had this experience and going in an enterprise, your lexicon is not the lexicon that's being used. And so I would use terms sometimes that I thought were shorthands to, having everyone understand and getting them on board, which wasn't. Like, for example, wow, we're about to make a paradigmatic shift. And people be like, para who?
Yeah, right. Language is super critical.
Right.
But have there been moments, Dino, where you actually had to choose, no, I'm actually going to use this language intentionally to have an impact in the organization because I want to draw people toward using the language of D&I or law, or using the language of professional development, using the language of your domain.
Absolutely.
So there's sometimes you meet them where you are and where they are, and other times you have to make courageous choices to go, nope, this is the language we're using from here on out to describe the thing that we're doing in the world.
No. I think that's a great point, Dia. And I think that's part of the conviction, right? That you need to have is definitely there's places, absolutely, where you're making those choices. And, this leads into the second point, Dia, which is like, you also have to, meeting people where they are, you have to be a good listener. Right? A good listener to not only hear the words that people are saying, but as we practice, right, in coaching and in other domains, have the 3 levels of listening. That is, one, the transactional listening, and then there is the much more sort of relationship listening, and then there's the oral listening, which is really around noticing people's body language and their cues and where they lean in or lean back or fold their arms, and picking up on those cues to say, that spoke to them. That word that I used, or when they used the word, that spoke, that made them lean in much more. And picking up on that to build that relationship and that connection, to pull that forward and say, you know what? That word actually does so much more for all of you. And you've helped me translate it, that I can not give up on my idea or give up on my word, but incorporate it, right? Yeah, that scales. So that's a piece around listening.
I love that because so for folks listening, I have on my site, you can get the 21, which are the 21 things you can do to elevate your impact in front of any audience. And they're very easy to implement like tomorrow. You could pick 2 of them and practice them for months. They're easy to understand and easy to apply, but to get great at them, takes some practice. And listening is in there. Even if you're stepping on stage and you're the one talking, what you're pointing to, Dino, around sort of that global listening, where do people sit back in their chairs? Where do they sit up straight? Where are they having a twinkle in their eye about something? Where are they exhaling? And being able to listen even while you talk is really important.
Absolutely. And that speaks to this point around, you said, in the second point that you shared at the beginning around control, right? How do I have control in those meetings? How do I have control when I'm in stage? Is because I am a connector, I get my energy from the control of being actually listening to people, looking how they're reacting. It's kind of like
listening for you is actually a control mechanism.
Control mechanism, absolutely. So here's what I would say. I've had wonderful moments where I've been on stage and feed off the people's energy, right? Because I see them getting excited, or conversely, I may see people like, you say, welcome everyone, the most typical thing. Welcome everyone to today's whatever it may be, all hands. Everyone's like, hi. And I'm like, seriously?
Yeah.
Hi, we're about to have something amazing happen. And I'm like, we can do better than that, right? So you get be the crowd cheerleader, and then people start leaning into it. And then you start seeing certain people light up in the audience. And that's the people I start noticing and connect with and start listening, as you said, globally to what's going on there. And I'll connect with that person. I'll look at that person, right? And build that rapport with them. In one-on-one meetings, it's easier to do because I have that whole person in front of me, or even if it's online, I can see what's going on. I'll comment on certain things. I'll pause. I'll ask questions, powerful questions, like say more about that.
Right.
I see that you leaned in when you did that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yes. I love that. Like, I noticed you leaned in when I said that. What's that? Say more about that. I think that's really beautiful because what you're doing is kind of you're letting what you're noticing actually be there and not just be like la 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 and charging forward, which is really I think it's really critical to the next sort of component of mastery, which is around impact. If you actually are listening enough and willing to notice what's happening in the room and include it in your real time, like that is a level of control. That's what I mean. It's exactly what I mean by control.
No, I love that. I love that, Dia. Absolutely, absolutely. And it's co-creating control, right? Where you can be vulnerable to also allow yourself to go on this journey with someone. So it's not power, as we say, different levels of power. It's not power on some people, it's power with. And that, when I think of control, it's power with. So there might be times too, and I'll just share this with everyone, like quite candidly, and it's happened to me several times, is that you're not always going to deliver what you think is the perfect pitch or the perfect way. It may not land in the way that you intended it to land. And you might have, right, the audience, and I'll say this about executive meetings where I'm like, yes, I'm about to go in there and show them this amazing work that we did. And they're like, yeah, we want to talk about this other thing over here that has nothing to do with what you're doing. And there have been times where I've been like deer-eyed, right? Like doe-eyed, as they said, just a deer caught in the headlights. And it didn't go as smoothly. But the one thing that I always did in there to walk away from those spaces is like, let me listen to what's going on here in this moment.
Well, that's a really courageous thing to do, though. And how, I mean, for folks who might be watching earlier in their careers, like, what is that's been a strategy you've developed for yourself, but there had to have been a time in your career where that felt really scary.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it's, I think that's when I think probably you give up control is, you let their narrative become your narrative and you forget about, going back to the first point, your conviction, right? Your conviction, you came in there to show them something that was absolutely an executive meeting, for example, that was absolutely powerful because you have that data behind it to share that. You have something that created an impact in the organization or on a team, and you're ready to share that back and make sure that you are able to build a bridge to connect going forward. And they might derail it and go somewhere else. And it's mastery over time. There's been times where I allowed their narrative to become my narrative and make me feel small, right? Quite honestly, where you're like, oh, wow, that wasn't really important, I guess, because they want to hear about this thing over here. And in those moments, there are definitely times where I got lost, but I had to go back, as I say, going back to the mat and saying, actually, no, that wasn't right. I'm going to go back in there. So one thing also that I would say about being in control is having resilience to come back, right? It is not, all hope is not lost in that one instance. And I think I see so many people just be deterred and dejected and feel like it's the end of the road.
Yep. So I think that is a component. So when I think about speaking powerfully, I don't think about winning in the moment. I think about, I want you, my clients, the universal you, to be able to speak powerfully and bring their most powerful selves to the table. And sometimes that means noticing when now's not the time, but not letting it mean that never is the time.
Never is a time. So, yes.
So, over time, we can build up mastery. We have moments and speed bumps. We get blocked. Things don't go as expected, but can you come back? I love that. That's so beautiful. And, while I talk in terms of critical communications moments where things are high stakes, those executive meetings you're talking about, high performance moments at all hands, industry communications moments where you're making a reputation for yourself in your domain. There are moments that are make or break, but really it's about multiple touch points that create, a body of your work.
Absolutely.
Through you speaking about your work, that becomes a platform for you.
Absolutely. I love that, Dia. Absolutely. The body of the work and I always use this term, and this from way back, continuity of experience, right?
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
you have to
say what that is for folks.
Yeah, so the continuity of experience is, doesn't mean that you're always going to be hitting all the high points really beautifully and you are the best speaker and the most, shiny and perfected person every time and always getting a yes. Or I love what you said, winning. It's not about winning, right? It's also, you have to be receptive to learning that I may not have, right, connected with this audience in the way that they need it at that moment. One of the things, and I use continuity of experience, is really around framing your mindset that things are long-term, right? There's an arc, there's a story, there are moments throughout to be doing this type of work. So, and communicating, right? Like throughout so many different touch points. Sorry if you just had a blender in the back.
Yeah.
Sai is getting
work from home.
As he's being married. So continuity experience is really, it's a term that's borrowed from my academic learning. And it's something that anyone that's familiar with John Dewey in his wonderful educational philosophy work is always around being a consummate pragmatist to say, what's the thread that we're always pulling through all those moments that may seem disparate from one another? That is about you being, and come back to this thing, you being in control, right? Of seeing those touch points as being contiguous to one another and not sort of scatter plotted all around.
Yeah, or just living in isolation,
Absolutely.
So in my definition of mastery, I think about, folks who I perceive as masterful, in their approach to and delivery of critical communications moments that make up your body of work and make up your platform. Yes. Because there are moments that are important. There are moments where you're like, this is a moment, when I think about impact, how do you know when you've had impact?
That's a great one, right? And the reason why I pause, it's like, wow, there's so many different spaces, right? I would say, for me, I know when I've made impact. It's not necessarily when I've gotten a yes. It's when no one said no. That's when I know I've made impact. Is people are ready to keep moving and keep going and exploring. Sometimes people would be like, yes, they're the fast followers that like, we totally understand. We're going to carry this vision forward. It's so wonderful. There's going to be people that are like, well, I'm still waiting to see, but they're still moving. And there's other people that are like, they might be the laggards, but they're looking, they're watching.
So there's is there like a lack of or a noticeable diminishing of friction?
That's it. Yes. I love that. A diminishing of friction. No one said no. Right. And it wasn't because they were afraid to say no. I've gotten no's before, right, in the past. But for me, because what I do in the world that I do is creating, right, making the impossible possible, you got to be really comfortable with ambiguity. And not everyone is always going to know and have it neatly packaged up for them to know exactly where they're going to go and exactly what's going to get done. But they're all willing to try and experiment and go on that journey with you. That's when I know, like, it's impacted people, when mass movement is happening.
Yeah. So your expectation is that, okay, I know I'm having impact. These are my words, not yours, but just to kind of, integrate it. Like, your expectation is that movement matters and you don't expect people to necessarily be enthusiastic. Like you don't, I hear you saying you don't expect them to be jumping for joy and like whole hog on your train. But if they're not stopping the train, like you're leaving room for people to move and have skepticism.
Absolutely. I need that. Like, we need that. I need that. Right. Coming from a philosophy background, like I need you to be confident in your own voice and coming to me and creating that safety where you can come to me and be like, you know what, this isn't working for me. Or, you know what, I found a other path to even accelerate what you're trying to do and make it go faster. So I want to create that container where people feel that they have some agency on. So this goes back to control. I do this with people, not to them and for them. And if anyone feels that, that's when you start getting these weird power dynamics, which that's not how I build things. So yeah, absolutely. The friction, it becomes more frictionless, and everyone's willing to experiment. I'll give an example because, right, instead of speaking abstractly here, is most current organization I'm in, I created a framework for how we're going to move things forward with inclusion and diversity efforts. And it's really been around enabling each executive to find a focal area where they feel most comfortable, where they can make impact. And these things are called small wins. Small wins. Do you feel comfortable in the inclusive hiring that we're about to have? Do you feel comfortable in inclusive performance development? Do you feel comfortable in doing something in the culture that's really going to demonstrate how we are inclusively? And provided them with the tools that they needed to know what's possible in those places, and for them to decide, where I can make the most impact is in this area. And each of them chose an area where they will feel that they will have the most impact, and made sure that we supported them, robustly, and made sure that they had some targets and some goals that they wanted to accomplish within there, and celebrated those particular goals and targets. Yeah.
And early on in the project, when you were communicating about it, were you finding that people were not stopping the project, but they were skeptical, and you didn't see that as if they were, you didn't see that as a signal that you were doing something wrong. You just let them be skeptical while they slowly walked forward.
Absolutely. Because if I knew that they were skeptical, to me, that meant that they were invested.
Because they were thinking about it. They had a point of view. Exactly. Yeah. Beautiful.
They're thinking about it, and they're thinking of offering something. So that's additive, not a detractor, right? So
this is so beautiful, because people come to me and they want to work with me often because they want to nail it, and there are moments where you got to nail it. Giving a TED talk, got to nail it, so my question always is like, it's tied to the question I asked you about, how do you know when you're having impact? What is nailing it for you? And it's not just like I said exactly what I wanted to say and it rolled off my tongue perfectly, and everyone's eyes filled with stars and they just zombie followed me through the hallway. Like, that's not what nailing it is. It's messier than that.
Yes.
And leaving, having a clear set of expectations and to know what to look for that says, oh yeah, this looks like I'm not nailing it, but I am. If everyone's in a room poking at your strategy, but guess what? They're there. They got a point of view, and they're actually that's even if they're fighting with you about it, that's a win, because they're in the room and they have a point of view.
Absolutely. And so I think when I come back to this is when you're having impact. I'll put it this way more succinctly, is when the audience is active and not passive. That's when I know I've nailed it. Right?
Even if it shows up as a little resistance.
It shows up resistant because they're actively involved.
That's great. That's fantastic.
So they're just clapping like, that was awesome. It filled me so much. Thank you. Goodbye. That will make me feel like, oh, I'm glad I nailed it that way. But they're just going away, and now they needed what they needed from just that moment, and that's it. They're not looking to keep moving things long-term and being part of that continuity of experience with me.
Fantastic. So it looks like we have somebody coming in. Hello, Michael. Thanks so much for joining us. And I'm happy to see you here joining us on LinkedIn. Dino, before we drop for the day, for someone who might, there's this moment I notice in my career where folks sort of go from senior manager to director, and they're having to not do the work as much, but talk about the work in the world. Daniel Shepard says resistance is a great form of engagement. Great reminder. That's beautiful. Is Daniel Shepard one of your people? Do you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
Absolutely. Hi, Daniel.
Great. So for folks that are sort of in that spot where they're recognizing they're not the one doing the work, but the one that's having to go out and talk about the work and, speak powerfully on behalf of the work. And they're at the beginning of that journey, walking into those waters of being in the way of the resistance, being in the way of scowling audiences, being in the way of skeptics and champions. Like, what is your hope for them, and what advice do you have for them?
Wow, that's a good one. That's a good one. Thank you, Daniel, for coming into this chat. The one thing I would say first is that there's something so important about feeling the anxiety that you have there, because that means that's a signal of something powerful that you're studying, and you have respect for that. So feel that anxiety and be with that anxiety and know like what that means for you, right? Now, what I'm hearing also in there is, okay, then what do you do with that anxiety when you're like, oh, like, right? Everything is weighing on your shoulder, and you have those high impact communication moments to make sure it goes forward. Always know that like you are doing this for and with others.
Yeah.
Right? It is not about you. If you start then feeling the anxiety just about you, and are you going going to do this right, then it's about you. It's not about others, right? Yeah. So one advice that I would have for you that are doing that, always remember to channel what are the voices of all these other people that I've been gathering this impact from. Share, if there's one technique that I've used in my academic and in my professional, business career, is I share stories. I share stories to connect it back. It's like Daniel once said, right, in this meeting around making sure that everyone had the powerful tools to communicate complex data, right? As Daniel has demonstrated, this is something important. And it's also important to me and to this team.
Right. So invoking the voices of others, even if they're not in the room, as a way to as a way to sort of bring to life that it's not all on you, and it's not about you.
Absolutely.
You're sort of a steward of bringing everything else forward.
I love that. You are a steward, right? And oftentimes I see my role as often like an ambassador. I'm an ambassador. And so I'm speaking on behalf, but I'm also representing a community.
Michael's got a question. When speaking, what are your thoughts on PowerPoints? Michael, is that a question for Dino? Or is that a question for me as a communications coach? Curious who that's for. But Dino, what is your point of view on PowerPoints? And of course, that could be a Google Slides, or it could be a beautiful AI, or whatever technology you're using.
Absolutely. Less is always more. Your slide should not be replacing your voice. It is there to be cohabiting the space with you. So treat that as a relationship also. That would be my advice, right? Less is always more. I know Dia has some phenomenal strategies on how to do this. So.
Well, for one, Michael, I would say there are some moments where presentation and documentation are the same thing, and there are other moments when they're not. So in recognizing the difference and when they actually have to serve both of those things as documentation and as presentation support, that should inform what your slides are doing. I would also say that, for me, I step in front of an audience and I'll have 85 slides, but they're single images. They're thought starters. I'm not, my content is not data heavy and data rich, but a lot of my clients, that's not true for them. I work with a lot of founders who are putting together their Series B stories, and they are very data heavy in parallel with having to be a narrative. So know what moment you're on and how you're going to use that slide or a particular piece of collateral as a way to support your voice, not as just a way to explain everything. So there's that. So I think those are my two. If I'm going to give a tip, recognize when presentation and documentation have to serve the same thing and let that inform what you do with them. And then secondly, understand what moment each slide is actually supporting.
Dia, can I add to that? Because there's something that I've learned from you, which has been a lifesaver for me in these high stakes communication moments. Bottom line. bottom line.
Bottom lines. What is the one? Yes. What is the one bottom line on each slide? And if there's a bunch of data, because it has to be there because it works as a documentation, you go in there knowing what is the one big idea bottom line that I'm getting to on this slide. Michael says he uses a workbook with PowerPoint. What are my thoughts? The question I'd have, Michael, is what are you doing? Are you teaching? I mean, it sounds like that's a facilitation moment. You know, Dino, you run a lot of learning events and experiences.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a point of view about pairing a workbook with PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, no, not too much here, Michael. I would say, you know, breaking up, especially, you know, in this virtual world that we are, and having everything be online, and knowing your audience, right? Fatigue that they can be experiencing from being online and having their eyes dilated in this particular way. Break it up. Break it up with moments of like, you got me in the workbook, take me out, and then say, pause. I need you all now to reflect. I need to see all your faces for a moment.
Yeah.
Right. So think about some strategies like that to just break out the monotony of just having a focus on slides.
Yeah. I have a friend and colleague in the world of advertising, and she talks about wiping the eye. You've got to do something to clear the eye. And these are sort of tactical things. The question I would send back to the virtual room right now is, what helps you speak powerfully on behalf of what impact you're trying to have? Mm-hmm. So I'll never say always use a PowerPoint, always use a workbook. I'll say you need to speak powerfully. What is the way for you to have the impact that you need to have? What are the tools that you have at your fingertips? And how will you use them for the sake of speaking powerfully so you can create the impact and outcome you're trying to create? Dino, thank you so much for joining me today. Thanks everyone for jumping on. Daniel and Michael, thanks so much for dropping some notes into the chat. It's super helpful to know we're not alone. If you're watching this on the replay, you can go to diabondi.com to see what we're all about. And Dino Anderson, you can find on LinkedIn. You can also get the 21, which are my 21 strategies that you can use to have more impact when you stand on any stage, big or small, by either texting the word impact to 66866 if you're in the United States, or going to diabondi.com and you can get it. It's a free download right there. Dino, you're the best.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dia. Thanks everyone for joining today and in the future. And let's go out there and keep creating movements that impact the world.
Thanks, Michael. You can connect with me on LinkedIn as well since you're here. Thanks so much.